Thank you. Hi, everyone. Can everybody see that now? Oh, I've had some problems this morning. What we're going to be talking about this morning, and what I'd like to do, is talk about the reshaping of American law and the treading down of democracy. And it was to do with a paper that Elder Paminda showed us. That was going to happen on December the 7th with regards to North Carolina. So I wanted to look deeper into what that was going to be like and what is going on with certain elites that are sort of shaping this behind the scenes. So we're going to look deeper into that. So if I just go back into the next slide.
Oh, you got to just click on the screen.
Right, okay.
Yeah, that's it. So every time you talk, you just got to click on the screen and then.
Yeah. Okay, so can somebody just read what's on the screen for me, please?
Sure.
Yeah.
It says, and he had two horns like a lamb. The lamb-like horns indicate youth, innocence, and gentleness, fitly representing the character of the United States when presented to the prophets as coming up in 1798. Among the Christian exiles who first fled to America and sought an asylum from royal oppression and priestly intolerance were many who determined to establish a government upon the broad foundation of civil and religious liberty. Their views found place in the Declaration of Independence, which set forth the great truth that all men are created equal and endowed with the inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the Constitution guarantees to the people the right of self-government, providing that representatives elected by the popular vote shall enact and administer the laws. Freedom of religious faith was also granted, every man being permitted to worship God according to the dictates of his conscience. Republicanism and Protestantism became the fundamental principles of the nation. These principles are the secret of its power and prosperity. The oppressed and downtrodden throughout Christendom have turned to this land with interest and hope. Millions have sought its shores, and the United States has risen to a place among the most powerful nations of the earth. Great Controversy 441.
Thank you very much, Curtis. What do you get from that? Because we did have, which was very sort of timely done, where we had Samoy doing the Mark of the Beast, very good study that she did. And we spoke about this. So would you like to enlighten the things that we drew out of this?
I think that the two main things were the role that the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence did for America when it was starting off as a nation. And the paragraph for Ellen White describes it as this nation with two horns that represented its the embodiment of what America stood for, which was a sanctuary from religious intolerance and a place where everyone could worship God according to the dictates of their conscience. But alongside that, religious freedom was their guarantee to self-government, meaning that they could elect their representatives and not and establish a government for themselves based on these two things, civil and religious liberty. And that's in essence what the
Amen. Yeah, amen. Thank you very much, Curtis. Very well said. Yeah, so we can see America as represented as the lamb-like beast. So what they're doing, they're projecting youth, innocence, and gentleness. So basically, they sort of, it's almost like you could say they're putting on this disguise. And basically it's to fit their purposes, because obviously they've got another agenda. So so we know that Christian exiles fled to America, and it was a country where they could sought asylum, definitely from oppression. And so these asylum seekers were seeking to establish a government upon the foundation of civil and religious liberty. Okay, so the Declaration of Independence sets forth the great truth. The great truth: all men are created equal, endowed with the inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is what you drew out, Curtis. So basically, the Constitution guarantees to the people the right of self-government, and this is ever so important, and this is what we're going to be elaborating on more, and what God meant by that. So representatives are to be elected by the popular vote, and enact and administer the law. So that's the way that God wanted it done, and he made sure that was put in the Constitution. So freedom from a religious faith is for them to worship God to dictate of their own conscience. And it says republicanism and Protestantism became the fundamental principles of the nation. And what were these principles? These principles are the secret of its power and prosperity. Prosperity means success. So the USA was created to be a country to protect those from being downtrodden and from being oppressed. Can someone read the next slide for me, please? We're going to start talking about the independent state legislature theory. Now, those who have been looking at Elder Perminder's presentations, he sort of talks about this, and he talked about a paper, and it brings this out, and especially about North Carolina and the things that are happening there. So we're going to start looking deeper into what this is about. And so can I have somebody who can read the next slide for me, please? Magda, would you kindly do that for me, please?
Sure. Following the dispute 2000 election, Chief Justice William Rehnquist wrote a concurring opinion in Bush versus Gore, proposing an embryonic version of the independent state legislature theory. Sorry? He argued that the Constitution's assignment of elections authority to state legislature diminishes state judges' power to alter the general coherence of the legislative scheme. This approach garnered little security outside academia at the time. 15 years later, the idea was exhumed as part of an effort to dismantle Arizona's independent redistricting commission. Again, the Supreme Court rejected the theory and let the commission continue its work.
Thank you for that, Magda. Now we're going to look at what that the slide that we just wrote just a moment ago. We just read just a minute ago. I've put like a little, it's not sort of waymarks, but it's just some dates that I want to sort of elaborate on. So basically, in that, the previous slide, in 2000, Chief Justice William Rehnquist, Bush versus Gore, so this is George Bush versus Al Gore. These are the two presidents at the time. Wrote, and he was a justice, and he wrote an opinion of the early stages of the ISL, so the independent state legislature theory. So he wrote a very early version of it, and he was a conservative judge. We're not going to go too much into this, but after this study, you can sort of look deeper into that. And then 2015, there was an effort to dismantle Arizona's independent redistricting commission. So the Supreme Court rejected this theory, in other words, the independent state legislature theory. I'll talk about the Bush versus Gore a bit later on. And in 2020, President Trump also tried to use this independent state legislature to overturn the elections. It declined a third time by the Supreme Court, except for 3 sitting justices. Now, I have got that paperwork with me at the moment. I'll go into more detail with that later on. So in the 7th of December, 2021, which is what Elder Perminder was talking about, where in the case of Moore versus Harper, we're now, to do with this legislature, we're waiting for the outcome of the case. And so that's where we need to be really focusing on and what's going to take place. I think we know what's going to happen, but he said to us that we've got to really look out and to see what's going to take place, because it's the danger that's going to come across from this decision. Okay, I'm going to go on to the next slide. All right, okay. There are two relevant clauses. One is the elections clause, which reads, the time, places and manager of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. But the Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations. The other is the presidential elections clause, which reads, each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors. This dispute hinges on how to understand the word legislature. The long-running understanding is that it refers to each state's general law-making processes, including all the normal procedures, including all the normal procedures and limitations. So if a state constitution subjects legislation to being blocked by a governor's veto or citizen referendum, election laws can be blocked by the same means. So this is what they're saying. So, and state courts must ensure that laws for federal elections, like all laws, comply with their state constitution, and state courts can't stop them. The extreme version of this theory, the ISL theory, would block legislators from delegating their authority to officials like governors, secretaries of state, or election commissioners who currently play important roles in administering elections. When we look back at the election in 2020, President Trump and his allies used...
Sorry, Debbie.
Yes, sorry, come.
Sorry, can you
go
just...
back?
Yes, sorry, that was really fast. I was trying to read it again because I'm not
I
sure.
beg your pardon. Yes, go on.
That's all right. Can you summarize that?
Right. Well, can you summarize it? Yes. Tell me what you think that you understand about it, because what we're talking about is the ISL, and we're outlining what we understand about what their, how can I put it? We're given two clauses and how they what the dispute is. So by reading that, can you tell me what you understand by it?
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at it saying, okay, I understood the first bit, legislature. That's I can't say it now. Legislature.
I know, I get my tongue tied.
I'm copying you.
Yeah.
The long-running understanding is that when it says legislature, it's the lawmaking process of the state's
Yes.
general lawmaking process, including all the normal procedures and limitations. So it's referring to a state's ability to make law and govern itself. I'm summarizing.
Right.
So if a state constitution, so each state has its own constitution or its own version of the constitution, how I'm understanding it.
Yeah.
If a state constitution subjects legislation to being blocked by a governor's veto, so if their constitution says that their laws can be stopped by a governor vetoing, a bit like the president vetoing it, so saying we're not doing that, or a citizen referendum, so the citizens vote they don't want to do that. Election laws can be blocked via the same means, so they can say we don't want to do that, and we don't want to. Okay. So the local people can do the same with election laws because they can do it with other things. Therefore, the governor or the people can say we don't want to do it this way.
Exactly.
And state courts must ensure that laws for federal elections, like all laws, comply with their state constitution, and state courts couldn't stop them.
Yeah.
Okay, so state courts must ensure that laws for federal elections, like all laws, right. So the local court in their region can decide they also can decide the rules for a federal election.
Yes.
Like all laws. So it has to comply with their own state constitution, and state courts can't stop them.
Yes. This is what they're saying.
Yeah, so the local court couldn't say, if the local court was run by a Republican judge, he couldn't say, no, we're not doing that, I'm overruling, because the state courts have to be subject to the people and the governor.
And to their own state.
I think.
No,
so
it is right.
Of
No, it is right. It's so
block
hard to
legislation from delegating their authority to officials. Okay, so this theory is going to stop the lawmakers in that state delegating their authority to officials like governors, secretaries, or state.
Yes.
Who currently play an important role in administering elections. So it's going to take the power from those people, basically, to do that, is it?
Yes, it is.
Could I
So
just
it blocks lawmakers in a local state from ruling their state how they want, basically. So it takes away their independence. So now it comes from the top, the federal level.
Yeah, who was that next?
Right?
Sorry, that was me.
Sorry, yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt. Sorry, I thought you'd finished. This question about the state legislature and what it is and what it consists of and how it's made. One of the reasons someone asked me, why did I even talk about this? What was the purpose of it? And the comment I'm about to make isn't the main reason why I brought this issue up. I think it has its own merit because of its its line in prophecy, which Debbie put really well when she did that timeline. So you can see that this is an ongoing issue that's important and a significant component of the upcoming general election in 2 years. But separate to that, over and over again in our movement, I can't remember the passage, the page number, but teachers, members have gone back to this Alan White quote that talks about the threefold parties in the US government, the courts, Congress, and the executive branch. And she talks about how the Sunday law is going to go into effect and who's going to be involved in that. And there's been a lot of chatter, a lot of discussion about who is the driving force behind that. To cut to the chase, is the executive branch involved in that? And people have got their own thoughts and ideas. And I think it came up, either was it last week or the week before, about the executive branch and how it's defined, etc. And people aren't sure what Ellen White meant. So us, have come up with their own little theories or ideas of what she was talking about. But as we're discussing this subject, what you'll find is it's the same question. When you go back to the original documents, if I can phrase it that way, and they talk about the legislature in those documents, people now are trying to understand, what does that mean? And the fight or the struggle is to define what the original intent of legislature meant. Did it mean literally that 1/3 of the government, the state government in this situation, Ellen White was talking about the federal government, is it talking about the 1/3 of the government that makes law, which is the pristine or the pure definition of legislature? It's Congress, it's the 1/3 of government that creates law. Or is it talking about the whole machinery, which would really talk about all three parties, all three components of government? And it would use legislature in a general sense. And this question or this fight that's going on now is the same discussion that we've been having in the movement for quite some time now. Depending on a person's perspective, it could be the last 12 months. Some people have been wrestling with this perhaps for years, but it's the same issue. When someone in authority that writes something and their word is considered law, for us, it's like Ellen White, for the US government, it's the Constitution. When they use words and we're separated decades or hundreds of years from those statements, we need to work out, what did that person or what did that document mean? And the struggle that's going on now is the same struggle that we're having in our movement. People don't know, people are questioning, what did Ellen White mean when she said, basically, if you read it literally, only 2 branches of the government are going to be involved in the Sunday law. And so the question is, what happened to the executive branch? Because she didn't mention it by name. And that question is the same one that's up before the court now, which is what the fight is about. What does that statement mean when it says legislature? Does it just mean, we'll just call it the state Congress, or does it mean the whole machinery? Because if it just means the state Congress, what this issue is, that if it's them that make the decisions, no one can argue or fight with them, which means the Supreme Court can't get involved, and which means the executive branch, the governor, can't get involved. And particularly the people can't do something. They can't rise up against Congress, the state Congress. That's one theory. And the other theory is when they said the legislature, they meant the whole machinery. It meant the people, it meant the courts, it meant Congress, it meant the governor. Everybody's involved. So that's what that issue is externally. And you'll notice that as this thing is coming up, because people have questioned what's the significance of it, we're having the same discussion. I was going to say fight, but discussion is probably a better word, internally. And we can't even figure out between ourselves what was the intent of the writer, Ellen White in this case. And so when we go to externally, we say, well, how come they can't figure it out? The conservative right are a bad, evil people trying to change and manipulate things to their own advantage. But when we do it internally, I'm just going to say this is hypothetically, half of us in the movement are those conservatives and half of us are those liberals, because we're saying, no, we have to be liberal about those that phrase. And others said, no, Ellen White said it's only two of the branches, so we have to take her at her word. It's exactly the same issue. So we've got the same struggle that the world has got. Sorry, it took a bit long. I'm done.
Thank you very much, Elder Barinda. That's lovely. We're going to go move on to the next slide. So when we look back at the election in 2020, President Trump and his allies used the independent state legislature theory as part of their effort to overturn the results. For a third time, the Supreme Court declined to adopt the theory, but three sitting justices, Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, and Neil Gorsuch, endorsed it, and we should know who those judges are. Most recently, gerrymanders in North Carolina, Kansas, and beyond have appealed the independent state legislature theory to try to block state courts from reviewing their maps. So far, the Supreme Court has not embraced it, but we know this is up for review in 7th of December 2022. We're going to now look at, we're going to go back in time now, and we're going to try to understand what gerrymandering is and where it originated from. So it originated from a gentleman called Elbridge Gerry, who was the 8th governor of Massachusetts. He was born in Marblehead, Massachusetts. I want you to remember that name, Marble, okay? Not so much Marblehead, but Marble. Just keep that on your mind for a while. So he was born on July 17, 1744. He's attained his education at Harvard University, where he graduated. After working in the family's shipping business for a number of years, Gerry switched careers and entered into politics. So he won his first election to the Massachusetts House of Representatives, a position he held from 1772 to 1775. He also served as a member of the Continental Congress from 1776 to 1780, and from 1783 to 1785, he was the president of the USA Treasury Board from 1776 to 1779, and served as a member of the US House of Representatives from 1789 to 1793. And he was deployed to France on a diplomatic mission in 1797. He also signed the Declaration of Independence, and in 1787 served as a delegate to the US Constitutional Convention. However, he declined to sign the Constitution, but ultimately endorsed it. Gerry won election to the Massachusetts governorship in April 2nd, 1810. He was re-elected to a second term in 1811. So during his tenure, tensions mounted when Federalist appointees were permitted to remain in office. Consequently, the gerrymander bill was created, which redistricted the state in a way that gave the Democratic Republicans more power. So the two parties at the time were Democratic Republicans and the Federalists. This helped him to maintain control of the legislature, I can never say that word, legislature and other official offices. Gerry himself did not create the name gerrymander, but he did approve the plan to redraw county boundaries. We just spoke about how he was educated at Harvard, so he became familiar with the English radical Whig country opposition tradition, which was greatly influential to the ideology of the American Revolution. This tradition was based on a deep hatred of centralized power and a fear of political and financial structures that supported such power as standing armies, high taxes, debts, and excessive executive authority. So this is about Eldridge Gerry. Due to this, Gerry had a deep fear of monarchical power, misuse of power, and the concentration of power. He became suspicious that a strong national government would annihilate state governments. In Philadelphia, he attended a constitutional convention and made it clear that he was suspicious about what? About democracy and putting a too great a trust in the people themselves. So on 31st of May, 1787, he stated that the problem with the state governments was their closeness to the people. Would anybody like to comment on that?
Yeah, I'm reading about him wanting to protect state governments. And I guess his fear is that a federal government would gain too much power and override decisions of these state governments. But in that second paragraph, he also holds the suspicion that the people in said states would gain too much power or too much say over how their government was going to run. So I'm trying to, I guess it's a question, trying to understand this dichotomy, or a supposed dichotomy between his views of the state's role and the people's role. What's his actual worldview with regards to how government should run?
Okay, we're going to go into that. I think it was sort of based on suspicion. He was also, it's almost like he had, when I looked deeper into this, there was a suspicion there. There was also conspiracy. It was almost had he had this fear, strong fear, conspiracy based on conspiracy theories or something like that to do with it. And I don't know if it's to do with the American Revolution that prompted him to think more like that. I don't know, but it was definitely something. He definitely had a fear there.
So he was an anti-federalist.
Anti-federalist, yes, he was. He was. Yeah, and we're going to go into that. So that's all I can answer at the moment. Sorry about that, Curtis. The word gerrymander came from a Federalist Boston Tea Party in February 1812. And it was one opponent of redistricting described the unnatural and monster-like shape of the remapped districts. So when you go onto the website, they'll show you how he instead of doing it in a way that you can understand how the mapping has been dealt with, they drew this unusual shape, and I will go more into that. So it was a big topic of discussion at the time, and because of its unnatural monster-like shape, and because of the remapped districts. So this particular paper called the Boston Gazette actually printed that and called it the salamander, Gerry Salamander. So that's where that came from, and he printed that in 26th of March 1812. Right, okay, so we'll go on to the next one. He was against proportional representation and thought the popular election of the House was unwise and unnecessary. So this is Gerry. While Gerry served, right, okay, I'll go back into what that means, I think. I go back into that. So does anybody know or understand what proportional representation is? If not, I'll
I think it's that each state,
yes, I think.
size,
Oh, go on, please.
Yeah, one person at a time, please. Sorry. Go ahead, Curtis.
Each state, based on their size, gets a certain number of representatives that they can send to Congress, the House. And yeah, so proportionally, they have representatives in the House based on the state's size, I guess.
Yeah. Could you give me an example of that? How would you work that out?
I can't think of the specific figures, but like
Hmm.
New York will get a certain number of representatives, and Texas will get a different number of representatives because they differently sized. I don't know the specific stuff.
Yeah, it's as if, you know, it's just supposing if I'm going to say A, B, and C. So if part A, they win 40%, part B, they win 30%, and say part C wins 20%. So how they view it is that A and B, because they got 40% and 30%, A and B win 2 seats, and then because part C won 20%, then they win 1 seat. So it's all proportionally based, not on winner takes all, that sort of thing. And one of the reasons why, when we look deeper into it, I thought to myself, why was he against this? Sorry, can I just bring this point in? Sorry. The reason why he was I wanted to know why he was against it. So I looked deeper into that, and because he was into this Jerry mapping. And one of the biggest advantages of proportional representation is that it's effectively renders gerrymandering. It's impossible to gerrymander. So I don't know if that was the reason he was against it. I don't know, but that's one of the things that I sort of looked deeper in, and that's when I found out about it. You can't gerrymander, and that, of course, we know that he signed for them to go ahead and do that. So yeah, that's one of it. Sorry, was somebody's going to say something then? I could hear somebody in the background trying to say something.
Yeah.
Oh dear, it's breaking up.
Oh, okay, sorry.
That's better.
Proportional representation is a term of mine, I feel really clearly. So when proportional representation is a term we use in the UK as well, for me, basically the people.
We can hardly hear you, Emma. Breaking up a bit.
So if that, like you said, about 40 and 60 or whatever percent.
Can't hear you.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
Oh, whatever percentage votes for that party.
Maybe if you just move on, because
yes, yeah, we can't hear it.
That much representation in parliaments, then 80% of the government is made up of Labour and 20% is made up of Conservatives. So it's directly.
Emma, you're not coming through okay.
It's the pop, which is the popular vote. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're going to move on. Sorry, Emma.
I don't know what to do.
Well, I was going to say we heard you clearly. Then
I can hear you loud and clear.
Yeah, we just heard.
Okay,
we just heard you clearly.
Is it my volume?
Yeah, it was sort of breaking up, but anyway. No, it keeps breaking up.
Emma, if you don't participate and just let Debbie carry on.
Okay, so I'm just going to pass Gary on. So while Jerry served as a representative in Congress, he disliked the partisan fighting between the two parties, so the Federalists and the Democrat Republicans. The hostility grew, and they were at odds how the US should deal with Great Britain at the time, as they drew closer to the War of 1812. He joined the Democratic Republicans after he was blamed for the XYZ affair, which was a breakdown in diplomatic relations with France due to mistreatment of an American delegation. He was unfairly blamed. He was an anti-federalist and did not agree with their doctrine or beliefs. So in 1812, the Democratic Republicans in Massachusetts came up with a clever idea of limiting the Federalist power. And this is where the party redrew the state's Senate districts to benefit their party. So basically, as Jerry ran for governor, it was motivated by his obsessive fears about various conspiracies underway to wreck the Republic. Okay, so in 1810, the inaugural address, Gerry called for an end to participant warfare between his Democratic Republicans and the Federalists. But the United States edged toward Great Britain in 1811. Gerry decided that Federalist protests against President James Madison's foreign policy had turned near treasonous. So Gerry replaced Federalists in state government jobs with Democratic Republicans. He got his Attorney General to prosecute Federalist newspaper editors for libel and seized control of the Federalist-dominated Harvard College Board. The gerrymander did its job by giving the Democratic Republicans a bigger Senate state majority in Massachusetts in April 1812 election, even though the Federalists actually got more votes statewide. But it couldn't help Gerry, who lost the statewide popular vote for governor to Federalist challenger Caleb Strong. Now we're going to, I wanted for people to understand, because we've just been talking about gerrymandering and redistricting. So I saw this little clip on video, and I think it describes it very well. And it also talks to you about this gentleman here, his name is Thomas Hofeller. I don't know how you pronounce his name, but he was a Republican map maker. And in this video, we learn how Republicans were willing to manipulate the elections by gerrymandering the political districts to give themselves the advantage by majority votes in state houses and Congress. So these state maps were the very maps which were thrown out by state courts. So I'm going to try and play this. It's like a 7-minute clip, and I'm hoping that everybody can hear it. So I'm just going to play a small clip, and if anybody can tell me if they can hear it.
In 2018, America.
Did everybody hear that?
Yes.
You did, right. I'm going to start it again then. Bear with me. If you can pay attention to what, when you hear how they're doing it. So this will give you a better idea of how this man was doing it.
Want to enlarge it? We don't have.
In 2018. Law in North Carolina, which bathrooms transgender individuals can use in North Carolina. In 2016 and 2017, federal courts ruled that most of these maps were unconstitutional. Republicans did wasn't just gerrymandering; it was racial gerrymandering. Deliberately took the political power.
Can't hear it, Dex, unless it's just me.
You can't hear it?
No, unless that's just me. I don't know if anybody else can say if they can hear it, what he's saying.
Can anybody else hear what it's saying?
We can hear it, but it's a bit low. It's just the volume's low. It's not.
Yeah, I don't know how to get it louder.
If you go to your computer and make your own volume higher, then the YouTube video will be higher.
Oh, right, okay.
And start it again.
I haven't got it on mute.
Ray, if you just turn up the computer your mum's on, the volume, and then it should make the video louder.
Right, I'm going to start again. I'm just going to start a little bit and see if you let me know if you can hear it.
But in North Carolina, the election results were really weird.
Was that louder?
Yes.
Yes, okay, I'll start again. Thank you.
In 2018, Americans voted for who would represent them in Congress. But in North Carolina, the election results were really weird. These were all the voters in North Carolina. They were voting for these 13 seats in Congress. About half voted for Republicans, and about 48% voted for Democrats. So you might think of the 13 congressional seats, maybe Democrats would have won 6 seats, and Republicans would have won 7. But no, Democrats only won 3 of 13 seats, way less than half. This imbalance was because North Carolina's congressional district had been gerrymandered. It means that these voters had been grouped into districts very strategically with the goal of benefiting one party. Gerrymandering has pretty much always happened in America. That's because every 10 years, the political districts are redrawn. And in most cases, those new lines get drawn by whoever holds power in the state government at the time. That's what happened in 2010. Republicans won control of lots of state governments and redrew political lines to favor themselves. And over the next few years, redistricting helped them hold on to almost all those states. This shifted the balance of power. A lot of this was one guy. Usually the voters get to pick the politicians. In redistricting, the politicians get to pick the voters. It's Thomas Hopler, the map maker who helped Republicans gerrymander districts over the last decade. When Hopler died in 2018, his daughter found thousands of his emails and files, which she shared with activists. The files show that Tom Hopler's fingerprints are all over the way America's political maps look today. But North Carolina was his masterpiece. And if you want to understand why gerrymandering is such a big problem in the US, that's a good place to start. The basics of gerrymandering are actually pretty simple. If you're a Republican trying to keep power, you want to do 2 things. First, pack as many Democratic voters as possible into a single district. If you have a district where almost everyone votes Democrat, that means almost half of these votes are basically wasted. You can also crack big Democratic areas into separate districts where there are slightly more Republicans. So even though an area has a lot of Democratic votes, they would actually lose in this district and in this district. These are the 2 elements of classic gerrymandering, packing and cracking. And Hopler employed these techniques masterfully in North Carolina. In 2011, he was hired to redraw the state's political lines. And for congressional districts, he came up with this map. Now I just want to focus in on District 12, this weird skinny shape. In order to make sense of this shape, we have to look at another map. This map shows the percentage of Black people in each neighborhood. The bluer areas are where more Black people live. Hopler basically gathered up Black people in Winston-Salem, Greensboro, and Charlotte, and packed them into one district. So that's how District 12 happened. Hopler also did this with North Carolina state representatives and state senators. For example, here are the state senate districts. Here he packed Winston-Salem into one district, and then packed Greensboro into its own district. These new districts helped Republicans get a stranglehold on power in the North Carolina State House. And over the next few years, they were able to pass crucial legislation.
A strict new voter ID law in North Carolina.
Which bathrooms transgender individuals can use in North Carolina? In 2016 and 2017, federal courts ruled that both of these maps were unconstitutional. They said what North Carolina Republicans did wasn't just gerrymandering, it was racial gerrymandering that deliberately dilute the political power of Black people. The court said the Republicans in the North Carolina State House now had to redraw the lines without looking at racial demographics. So they went back to Tom Hopler. This time Hopler couldn't look at race. Instead, he looked at which areas voted for Democrats and which areas voted for Republicans. Instead of a racial gerrymander, it would be a partisan gerrymander. Here's that using data from 2014. The bluer an area, the more Democratic voters there are. Now, if you zoom in here to Greensboro, you can see one of the highest concentrations of Democratic voters in the state. Hopler drew a congressional district line to crack this community in half. This meant Democrats here were now in the minority in their district, and Democrats here were also in the minority in their district. Hofler employed these techniques all over the state to create North Carolina's new political districts. And the first big test for these new maps would be the 2018 election. Democrats were expected to turn out in droves.
Democrats are vying for a potential blue wave. The wave that Republicans fear is going to wipe them out.
So, how do the maps do? For state representatives, Democrats got 51% of the vote. They only won 46% of seats. For state senate, they received half the vote and won just 42% of seats. And for Congress, you already know how that one turned out. Democrats won nearly half the votes, but won only 3 out of 13 seats. A year later, in 2019, the Supreme Court waited. They said it was beyond their reach, that it wasn't their job to fix it. All of this raised an existential question. If Republicans could continue drawing the lines to stay in power, how could they ever be elected out of office? But the Supreme Court's ruling left open the possibility for state courts to rule on partisan gerrymandering. And in September 2019, that's exactly what North Carolina's Supreme Court did. The court found that partisan gerrymandering violated the state constitution. In the court's decision, it was Hofler's title that helped prove that North Carolina Republicans drew these lines with a clear intention of benefiting themselves. Ultimately, the court said North Carolina Republicans had to redraw the state House and state Senate maps one more time. This new map, approved by North Carolina legislators, is much less biased toward one party, even though it took some extreme measures and nearly a decade to force politicians to draw a fair map. In the last few years, the courts in several states, like Florida and Pennsylvania, have made partisan gerrymandering much harder. And that is also the case in North Carolina. Hofler is gone here. But in other states across the country, many maps he helped draw are still in use. And while there's now a clear strategy to challenge these maps in state courts, many voters are effectively not choosing their representatives. It's like Hofler said, the representatives are choosing the voters.
Redistricting is democracy at work. Redistricting is like an election in reverse.
In 2018, America.
Okay. Does anybody want to comment on that video?
I just think that I would need to watch it again because I could hardly, it wasn't very clear.
No, okay. What I can do for you, I'll send it to you by WhatsApp.
Yeah, thanks, Debbie.
Yes, okay. Thank you. Okay.
Could you post it in the group, please?
Yeah, of course I will.
Thank you.
I'll do that. Right, Magda, would you like to read the next slide, please?
Yes. From the Washington Post, facts of the case. After the 2020 census, in which North Carolina gained an additional seat in the U.S. House of Representatives, and thus required redistricting of the state, North Carolina's Republican majority state legislatures passed a partisan gerrymander. The map was challenged in state court, and in February 2022, the North Carolina Supreme Court struck down the map for violating the state constitution's free election clause and other provisions.
Thank you very much, Magda. Curtis, can I get you to read the next one, please?
Sure. Commenting from the Washington Post, facts of the case. The legislature proposed a second gerrymandered map, so the court ordered a special master to create a map for the 2020 congressional elections. The legislators asked the U.S. Supreme Court to review based on an argument that the Elections Clause of the U.S. Constitution gives state legislatures alone the authority to regulate federal elections, the so-called independent state legislature theory. Questions. Under the U.S. Constitution, Does the state legislative body, independent of any constraints by state
That's supposed to be state. Yes, sorry, it's my
by
typing.
state courts or other laws, have sole authority to regulate federal elections?
Would you like to comment on that, Curtis? Please.
While I was reading it, to be honest, I was trying to make sense of what it's saying. So if you give me a moment.
No, sure, yeah, that's okay.
So from what I understand, after the gerrymandered map was shot down, the legislature proposed this second map that again had been gerrymandered, and the court decided to create an independent body to create a map for the 2020 elections that were upcoming. And the legislators then went to the US Supreme Court, so outside of the state Supreme Court, of the federal US Supreme Court, to review what had taken place, based on arguments that the Constitution allowed the state legislatures alone the authority to regulate federal elections. So they are saying that the federal, their gerrymandered map being shot down was unconstitutional because the state should have the sole authority to decide how federal elections take place within their state. So the question that's being posed is this: does the US Constitution give the state legislative body, independent of whatever constraints state courts or other laws have, the authority to regulate federal elections that happen within their state?
Right, okay.
And that dispute between this independent state legislature theory.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much, Curtis. Does anybody know, or is anybody familiar with that person that I'm showing on the screen at the moment? Has anybody heard of him?
Yes.
You have? Who said yes?
Me, Emma.
Oh, right.
Because he's the president. Oh, he's the vice president of the Federalist Society, and he used to do with the Federalist Society. I think he's been mentioned before. Yeah.
Oh, has he? Oh, right. I was going to say it's the first I've come across him anyway. Basically, his name's Leonard Leo. He's 57 years of age. He's an American lawyer and conservative legal activist and executive vice president of the Federalist Society. So he joined this group in 1989 when he was a law student at Cornell Law School. He is a devout Catholic. Now, this particular man, he's the person who's behind. There's a lot of things about this man that people don't know about, and he's actually been working behind the scenes. So I'll talk about him a little bit more on the next slide. So Leonard Leo is not known to the American public, and you think to yourself, why wasn't he? And we know from when you look deeper into it that he works behind the scenes, and we're going to find out the sort of things that he's been doing. So he was instrumental in maneuvering Donald Trump to reshape the court. He's against abortion due to his Catholic faith. He's a devout Catholic. They say that he's one of the most powerful people in America today. So why do they say that? He's a head of a political group. He set up the Marble Trust Foundation. Now, remember when we were looking at Elbridge Gerry, I think part of his address was Marble Head. So for me, it struck something that, he set up this foundation. It's called the Marble Trust Foundation. He also set up the Rule of Law Trust, the Federalist Society, the Honest Elections Project, Elias Judicial Education Project, and these names are he keeps changing. So it's Honest Elections Project, Judicial Education Project, then he changed it to the 85 Fund. Then he set up the Judicial Crisis Network. And you're thinking to yourself, well, what are all these things? Well, the Marble Foundation is a trust which accepts donations from very wealthy donors for political groups. So this is what he's doing underhandedly behind the scenes. He set up these non-profit sort of foundations. So these very, very wealthy people could send him money, and he could use it for his political gain. So in this instance, conservative. So little is known about these trusts because they're used for political use. They recently reviewed a donation which was largest ever received from a donor called Barry Seed. And Barry Seed is what Elder Piminda was talking about. He spoke about that they received this 1.6 billion donation. So I wanted to know who gave it. Who was this person who gave it? And his name's Barry Seed, and it's spelled B-A-R-R-E, and his surname is S-E-I-D. So I think, I'm not sure if it's Seed or Seed, but it's Barry Seed. So this particular gentleman, he's 90 years of age, and he's a billionaire, and he was the one who gave this Leo this amount of money. So he didn't give it in cash. Actually, what he did was he gave them his business. Now, this particular billionaire, very, very wealthy, very well known, and the business was called Trip Light. It was sort of electronic sort of business, manufacturing business. And so what he did, he actually gave Leo this particular business, and it was Leonard Leo who actually sold the business. He sold it for 1.6 billion. So you think to yourself, well, if you wanted to give him some money for this political use, why didn't he just, just put the cash through straight through to the fund? And the reason why he did it the way he did it was because it was a non-profit sort of company. If he gave him the normal route through to his bank account or to the fund, he would have been charged 400 million tax. So to avoid that, what he did was he gave him the building so he could sell it, gave it to the foundation, and that way they could have the maximum amount of money for him to use. So that's why he did it that way. He wanted him to have the maximum funds. So the trust, before receiving this donation, had already distributed nearly $250 million to the Rule of Law Trust Group. So we're going to go on to what the Rule of Law Trust is. That's one of the projects he set up. And this law, and this particular law, which I think you're going to find interesting, was received to push forward for the appointees of these conservative judges. Okay, so these conservative judges that he's pushed forward, that's what this fund was used for. So this particular trust was sort of instrumental in pushing judges who will build a conservative judicial infrastructure around the country. So this is what he was up to. All these things were going underhandedly when nobody sort of really understood what was going on. So Leonard Leo was therefore, he was the man behind the instrument, he was instrumental for obtaining these funds. So he obtained these funds in order so that he could do this. And it's known today as dark money. Okay, dark money. And you think to yourself, why do they call that? Because little is known about it. It's all sort of disguised. It's very secretive. So they call it dark money. And the people who receive these type of donations, they call them the donor elite. And these donor elites are made up of billionaires, millionaires, and there's about 400 to 500 of them who are in this donor elite. So yeah, I think what's bear with me. So what they were trying to do is hide these funds. So there was a better example of that in 2010 when the Supreme Court had a 5-4 ruling in Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission, which allowed wealthy donors, corporations and special interest groups to spend unlimited cash on elections. And of course, rather than just this 1.6 billion, if you look at the whole of it, it must have been around about 6 billion that had been poured in to these donations. So we're talking vast amount of money, and it's normally into these non-profit organizations. So what they did, they didn't want to disclose who they were, and they won this case, for a court case, to say that they didn't have to disclose who they were, and so that went through. And so the court actually preserved their anonymity. Okay, so we're now going to go into the Federalist Society. I think that's in there as well. So this society was founded in 1982, which is Leonard Leo was the head of. He became the co-chair and used his influence to back conservative judicial nominees through the fundraising. So this Federalist Society was founded by law students who wanted to challenge what they perceived as a dominant liberal ideology. So its co-chair and former vice president was Leonard Leo. The Federalist Society showed its fangs in 2005. So White House, who's a senator, Democratic senator, said President George W. Bush chose Harriet Miers for the Supreme Court. Now, I think Elder Perminder actually brought this case up. So the Federal Society came forward to defeat the nomination of an extremely talented lawyer by a Republican president because she was not, that was Harriet Miers, to quote that she was not one of them. It was at this point that the grip of the donor elite and Leo took hold. So Justice Samuel Alito was the product of that. And he proved himself on the court as being a faithful workhorse for that dark money corporate white ring crew. The Honest Elections Project is a project that, again, Leonard Leo started. And it's a project which was one of an interlinked group fund donations, dark money. And this was received from, these donations were received from the Koch brothers. We're going to be talking more about those later in the presentation today. So remember that name, Koch brothers. They're libertarian billionaire brothers who are against climate change because of their business. Their business is dealing with fossil fuels, etc. And we'll talk more about that later on. So these brothers, they're not particularly political. They did have some, I think there was one of the brothers who tried to go for vice president but didn't get in. But they have been using this money that they have to steer the country to where it wants it to be, because of their business and because of their money. And so we'll discuss more at that again.
Deb?
Yes, sorry, go on.
Am I wrong in thinking the Federalist Society was founded in 1982?
It was founded in 1982. Yes, it was.
2005. I know that was quite significant for some reason, but I can't remember why.
Yes, it's because of Harriet Miers. Harriet Miers, but you know, when during President George Bush's when he was in, they chose Harriet Miers, and that's what I just said. And then, of course, the Republicans came against her. And
okay.
Yeah, that's the reason why.
1982 for the start.
Yeah, that was 2005. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, so we're going to talk. So the Honest Elections Project, what it does, what it's going to do. I think that I will talk about that more later because I think I'm going to bring that up later. So basically, in a nutshell, it's Leonard Leo who's been the brains in all these sort of groups and these fundraising things. It's him that's been doing it. He's been doing it behind the scenes in order to raise up money to push conservative judges in courts, use the money for their own means and other things, and he's been using it for the Honest Elections projects, but we're going to talk about later on in the presentation today. But basically, he's raised a lot of money. I mean, I'm not talking millions, but I'm talking billions. And yeah.
And that number 5, I'm sure that was the former secretary of Clarence Thomas, a woman who was the president of it.
Yeah.
Leo.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Right. Okay. All right. We're going to move on now. Okay. So Leonard Leo, he was an undergraduate at Columbia University. Oh, we're going to talk about the judges now. So these are the judges that Neil Gorsuch, Leonard Leo pushed forward to get into the judicial courts. So we're not going to look at all the judges. We're just going to look at one. And this particular one caught my attention, Neil Gorsuch, and you should know who he is. And so I found out a little bit, and he's a conservative judge, and he's one of the judges that Leonard Leo helped to get in to appoint. And so this Neil Gorsuch was an undergraduate at Columbia University. Gorsuch co-founded the right-wing campus newspaper, the Federalist paper. He criticised anti-apartheid protests, saying divestment could hurt the university's endowment. He also criticised racial justice protests and Black-led movements on campus, while he defended the Reagan administration due to the Iran-Contra scandal. He had very solid right-wing reactionary views from the beginning. He did attack South African divestment after the university had already decided to divest. He attacked a protest led by Black students against racism on campus, not based on the substance of the issue, but saying that people involved were revolutionaries. He did stick up for Ronald Reagan in the Iran-Contra affair, Iran-Contra scandal, which was an extreme position even for conservatives at the time. He's willing to interpret laws in a way that comes out to really unjust results. He really had strong right-wing ties through his family connections coming into college. He got Cause Beer funding, which is a notorious right-wing advocate corporation that had notoriously right-wing positions. He working with billionaires, being an active member of the Federalist Society, which in the main right-wing law organization that produces a lot of the judges that are on the federal bench. The judge told his class that employers, specifically law firms, should ask women, listen to this part, should ask women seeking jobs about their plans for having children, and implied that women manipulate companies starting in the interview stage to extract maternity benefits. To extract maternity benefits. So we're going from him in college to him this past year teaching at the University of Colorado. So we know he had very strong sort of conservative views here. So we're going to go on now to talk about Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, who's a Democrat. Now he spoke to the Washington Post about his views about what's going on, and he has a very good understanding of what's going on. But what I couldn't understand is if he knows what's going on, how is it that the Democrats didn't really stop the Republicans in their nip it in the bud when they first knew? I didn't understand that part, but I'm going to read what the newspaper said. So Sheldon Whitehouse was age 66. He's an American lawyer and politician serving as the junior United States Senator from Rhode Island since 2007. He was a member of the Democratic Party. He served as a United States Attorney from 1993 to 1998. And he was one of the 71st Attorney General of Rhode Island from 1999 to 2003. So Whitehouse wanted to make the Senate aware of climate change and wanted them to act on it. He had been working on this urgent cause for 9 years under the title Time to Wake Up. Now his plan is to highlight right-wing influence on the Supreme Court. He calls this the scheme. So this is one of the speeches that he brought out. Now, right, okay, I think, look, I'll go back to this one. So the scheme is a series about a plot by wrongwing donors' interest to capture the Supreme Court and achieve through the institution's power what they cannot through other branches of government. He expounds on the decade-long roots of the master plan, how it was watered by dark money, and how it bore full fruit when President Donald Trump installed a six justice right-wing majority on the court. Sheldon says he has no faith in these particular appointees, these judges, and in particular, Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett. They're all conservative judges. He acknowledges the embarrassment that Democrats were sleeping sentries, okay, watchmen, as the threat unfolded. Sheldon commented that the 6-3 conservative majority on the court is no accident, but the product of special interests and dark money, hundreds of millions of dollars in anonymous hidden spending. What essentially has happened is that a bunch of fossil fuel billionaires have run a massive covert operation in and against their own country, and that's a scheme. Whitehouse highlights the case for the Americans for Prosperity Foundation front group, the wealthy Koch brothers that successfully sued to prevent access to donor information. And the Judicial Crisis Network, and anonymous donors gave tens of millions of dollars to the Judicial Crisis Network, which is a right-wing advocacy organization to fund advertising campaigns, supporting Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, or Barrett. So these are the justices that were put in the Supreme Court. And he quoted that he doesn't believe that these judges are impartial. Now, but this is called the Powell memo. And this is White House delivered 12 speeches, especially about the Powell memo. It focused on a political uproar that upset American corporate elite. Can I get somebody to read that for me, please? Just the grey bit. I don't know who's there. I can't see who's there.
I'll read
No.
it.
Yes,
The
thank you,
Powell
Cedric.
memo, is that the one?
Yes.
The Powell memo was a precipitating event for the swift rise and astounding success of big business and its control of the United States, starting in the early 1970s. The memo presented a whole strategy for how the corporate life form could take over the key portions of the system without the other side knowing what was happening. Unless they have read the memo, they still don't. To your left is the first page of the memo with its thesis circled.
Okay, thank you very much, Cedric. So this Powell memorandum ultimately came to be a blueprint for the rise of the American conservative movement and the formation of a network of influential right-wing think tanks and lobbying organizations such as the Business Roundtable, the Heritage Foundation, the Cato Institute, and Manhattan Institute for Policy. So the US Chamber of Commerce commissioned from Powell a strategic plan from reasserting corporate authority over the political domain. So one section of Powell's secret report called Neglected Opportunity in the Courts described exploiting judicial action as an area of vast opportunity. He added that with an activist-minded Supreme Court, the judiciary may be the most important instrument for social, economic, and political change. The report was dated August 1971. 2 months later, Republican President Richard Nixon nominated Powell to the Supreme Court. So Powell, his name was Lewis F. Powell, and he was an American lawyer and journalist who served as an Associate Justice for the Supreme Court from 1972 to 1987. Right, and he wrote this because I think he was looking at an activist called Ralph Nader, and that's what sparked him off to write this memo. So he said this memo called for America to become aggressive in molding society's thinking about business, government, politics, and law in the US. Does anybody want to make a comment on that one? If not, we'll move on swiftly. The Honest Elections Project is a dark money voter suppression group formed in February 2020, and that is a project of the 85 Fund. The 85 Fund is a new legal name for the Judicial Education Project, a group closely linked to Leonard Leo that has played an integral role in Trump's effort to fill the federal judiciary with right-wing judges. Below is a guide to the website. It is a really comprehensive insight to how they are trying to influence voters, that voter fraud exists, and ways to prevent it happening. All the funds from donors have been used to design this website with information, leaflets, and statistics. We're going to look at the website now. Now see if it opens up. So this is the website that they're it's quite a comprehensive thing. And they've you know, I just get you to, it's got statistics in it, all kinds of things. And they're getting people to look at these things, to phone them up if they've got any queries about any reason for, you know, voting. It's got all kinds of things. This is where this money, this private money is being spent, so that people can look at this website. And it's called the Honest Elections Project. This is run by this Leno Leo through this dark money. The thing is, how do I get out of this now? Open, I don't. Bear with me. Hello, did everybody see that, the website then?
No, Deb.
Oh, you didn't see it? All right. Okay. Well, I suggest that when you go on to it, well, I'll have to again put that in the I'll put that in the WhatsApp for you. So going back to this senator, Sheldon Whitehouse, his name is, he warns of special interests that groom young judges, promote them in advertising campaigns, and which tries to influence them in legal briefs or lacking in transparency. Democrats have been criticized for being complacent as Republicans unspool their 50-year campaign to capture the courts. So White agrees it's way too late. It's really embarrassing how they've let this dark money steal their crown. And I agree with that. I agree with that.
So then how is that allowed then, Debbie?
Because well, the thing is, that's the question. The thing is, they knew since the 2020 insurrection. I looked at this thing called the Fair Representation Act, and what the Democrats did, they actually put in a bill at the 117th Congress for what is it, redistricting, map districting. And they called for this fair voting system. So they wanted to have redistricting commissions to have the oversight of this redistricting maps in each state. So I know that they did that on, I think it was in June 2021. So even though they know some things are going on, they're trying to push their agenda forward to try and get this fair voting system in. I don't know what came of this Bill of Rights that they're trying to put through. I don't even know if it got passed, but I know that they're trying to do something about it because of all these things that are going on. So, and I'll come back to that in more detail, CG, if you don't mind.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, okay, so this is part of their website. When you go onto it, this is what you'll see. And it talks about democracy. It talks about the elections, unfair elections, and all these type of things. It's very, very in depth. So when I put the actual link, I'll put that in the forum, and you can have a look at it and have a look at how they're doing things. Very, very comprehensive. So this really is, it's a new conservative organisation fighting to restrict voting in the 2020 presidential election. And it really is just a rebanded group that is part of a dark money network, and it was trying to help Donald Trump's effort to remake the US federal judiciary. So this is the organisation that we're talking about, the Honest Elections Project, and it seemed to emerge out of nowhere a few months ago and started stoking fears about voter fraud. So it's backed by a dark money group funded by right-wing stalwarts like the Koch brothers. We're going to talk about them, and the Betsy DeVos family. I don't know much about those. The Honest Elections Project is part of the network that pushed the US Supreme Court to pick these particular judges, which is Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and this is what it is. And it's become this fight over these voting rights. So this is why they set this up. Of course, it's through all this money they're able to do it. So in 2020, there had been a Supreme Court's ruling in Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission, which allowed wealthy donors, corporations, and special interest groups to spend unlimited cash on elections. Since then, an estimated $6 billion in dark money, often from non-profits that are not required to disclose their donors, had poured into political campaigns. There is no transparency where people are able to understand the trail where these funds originated. So donors depended on the courts to preserve their anonymity, and this is what I spoke about before. The senator highlights last year's case of the Americans for Prosperity Foundation front group of the wealthy Koch brothers that successfully sued to prevent access to donor information, and they won that. So we're going to talk about who these Koch brothers are now in more detail. And this is what Elder Baminda brought up in one of his studies. And these are one of the brothers, billionaire brothers, who are, when we look about what they're doing, it's actually these people who are steering America. It's not actually the judges, well, it's not the judges, the people who come into position, into power. into the elections. It's not actually them, it's these people, these very wealthy people who are actually steering America where they want it to be. So we're going to go more detail on who they are. And I don't think a lot of people know about them. But so they started, first of all, the business was started by their father, Fred Koch, who developed a method of refining crude into gasoline. So Fred Koch was a chemical engineer and founded the oil refinery firm Koch Industries. Now, Fred Koch had, I found out when I read about him, he had ties with Stalin and Hitler. And I don't mean friendship, it was more business-like, and it was to do with the oil that he supplied to them. He's in the family, this Fred Koch had 4 sons. And in particular, Charles and David are the ones who are currently running the firm at the moment. And they are billionaires. The Koch brothers to date they are the second privately owned company in the USA. Their net value at 2019 was 115 billion. So we can see the level of funds that they have. So Charles and David Koch built a political network of libertarian and conservative donors, as well as financial revenue in other areas such as multimedia, advertising and television. In 2019, David Koch died, sadly. So why are they giving money to the Republicans is the question that we need to be asking. And I'm going to talk about that. There's a lady called Jane Mayer. If you want to learn about the Koch brothers and what they were up to, she has written a very detailed book about this dark money, and particularly these Koch brothers. And she said that they were behind the rise of the radical right, and of course there was a lot, and of course in that country, in the USA, the rise of inequality, and also why climate change actually didn't happen. So we're going to be talking, why was that such a, why? Because I know that the White House wanted to talk about climate change, and why are these particular brothers, why are they against it? Now they have a company called Koch Industries, which is a fossil fuel company. It was a fossil fuel company, and of course they didn't want to have anything to do with climate change, because it would significantly damage their finances, because they'd have to close the business basically. So because of the fossil fuels. Okay. Right. Okay. Right. Okay. So basically, in 1976, Charles Koch wrote about, in 1976, he wanted to build a radical movement to change the way that American voted, and thought, and he said that he needed to, unquote, destroy the statist paradigm and start a movement which he wanted to model on the John Birch Society. And in this movement, he launched it, and it's been a long-running project. And he's an engineer. He's very extraordinarily wealthy. And what he did was he worked with a number of very smart people to build this network to try and push the country in the direction that he wanted it to go. So obviously he's against, when it comes about climate change, he is actually in denial about it. So because of their refinery, they've got it makes them a lot of money. And even though they their business is really high in polluting the country, the fossil fuel business, this is how they've built their fortune. So they're definitely against it, because they know what it will mean. It will mean to desecrate their business, and of course, if you cut their money, it cuts their power. So there's a number of companies that are part of this network that he set up, and I was talked about this, and it was this group is 400 or 500 members, and they're secret billionaires, and they're so underhanded that they managed to, when they, like when we're working, we pay tax. They managed to get their tax to 15%, so they don't pay a lot of tax. And in fact, that's probably the lowest that even most Americans would pay. So we're going to look about how they built their fortunes. There was a family feud that took place in the family before the 4 brothers. and two of them formed one. I think the three of them ganged against the older brother, and he called him into a meeting and said, right, if you don't give us your part of the fortune, your part of your inheritance, we're going to go to Dad and we're going to tell him that you're gay. And so the other couple, that's three against them. And so he said, right, he said, I'm not putting up with this, and he walked out. So you've got two brothers that went their way, took their fortunes and went their way. And these other two brothers, Charles and David, were the ones who took over the business. So you can see they're very ruthless. Behind the scenes, they're very ruthless. And so this is how they carried on the family fortune. Okay. So the Kochs have built an assembly line to manufacture political change, and includes the think tanks which produce papers. It includes advocacy groups that advocate for policies, and it includes giving money to candidates and to give money to candidates. And I'm going to talk to you about how they're going to talk about climate change. How did they get the government to not talk about it? And we're going to go in more detail about how they did it. So what they did was they set up these advocacy groups saying, so what they did was they got candidates to sign a pledge. Stay with me. Right, this is how they did it, to override having to pay or come into contact with this climate change, because they knew they'd have to take money out of it, out of their business. They're the largest political group in Americas for prosperity. They have a pledge that says, if you want to get money from this group or from the donors, you have to sign a pledge. So this is how, and they're talking about the political parties here. So if they want money for their political party, they're saying you have to sign this pledge. And in that pledge, it says that if you're elected, you will do nothing about the climate change that requires spending any money on the problem. And 156 members of Congress currently have signed that pledge. I mean, this is quite, I was quite sort of taken aback when I heard this. So 156 members of Congress currently have signed that pledge, and to say that they won't do anything about climate change, so that these Koch brothers will give them the money to their causes. So this is how they've got over it. And this is why nothing's been done about climate change. So what we're seeing here, basically, we're seeing how very wealthy people are, like the Koch brothers, are running the United States. It's not built on the Constitution or anything like that. It's built to do with their own power, to save their money. And they're using the political field to do that. And so they're sort of using each other, really, because the Republicans are having all this money from them. They're able to get what they want. These Koch brothers also are using the political field to get what they want. It's a really dark world out there, and people are thinking they're getting a fair vote, but really it's these very wealthy people who are steering the country where they want it to be, and they're gaining from it. So we're going to talk about two streams of information. We're just going to wrap this up now. And Elder tested a study on two streams of information. I just want to bring it into this study. So she said, as a movement, we need to understand which side we're on. Okay, so the line I've done there is from Eden to Eden. So in the beginning, there was a distrust in government, in God's government, which Lucifer did, and imagine that God was restricting their liberty. So this is what he was telling them. And so we look at the opposite and what will be the outcome here. So we're going to look at, so the United States, we know from the beginning is known as the glorious land. And the United States is a parable and symbolic of Eden. It's built on the principle of freedom as God intended it to be. So freedom is the foundation principle of the USA. So, but from 1798 to today, the USA continues to fight over these two streams of information. So the underlying test at the Sunday law centers on a trial test, the conflict between two streams of information and ethos. So when we get back to Eden, it depends on what you choose and how you conform to it. So the test will be this will be the test of the whole world between two streams of information and two ethoses. So the Republicans are now, as we understand about this, are heading into authoritarian sort of government. You can bring fascism into that and totalitarianism, and that's going to set the foundation of their government, which totally comes against the Constitution. So when we look back in the beginning of Eden, we know what Adam and Eve chose. So what are they going to choose, in our time? What's going to happen in our time? They chose freedom over equality. The Democrats will be powerless to do anything about it. So, so at the Sunday Law, in the final closing act, is left ethos. Ethos is equality. But when freedom and equality collide, equality is prioritized. The right wing will be the opposite. So when the two collide, freedom is prioritized, not equality. Okay, and that's where this government is heading. And we can see that it's going to be the very wealthy who are steering the country, and the Republicans are using these very wealthy people to get into, to get the votes illegally, not to do things, the correct way, but they're using these men to get what they want so they can stay in power. And I do believe that when they do get into power, they'll run authoritarianism type of government. So does anybody have any questions?
So why are the Koch brothers? Coke.
Yeah.
K-O-C-K is
Coke.
Coke.
Yes. Think of Coca-Cola.
Oh, okay. So why are they allowed to deceive the people, and why isn't anybody? Is it because they got all that billions of money?
Yes,
a lot of money.
Yes, it is, and they're using it because they've got a fossil fuel company, and they know that the Democrats are talking about climate change, and I think because they're one of the top companies that what do you call it now? When they bring all this stuff into the what's the name that I'm thinking of? They're the highest polluters. One of the highest polluters. Okay, and of course, when they're talking about climate change, what's that going to do for their company? It's going to be it's going to drastically, hurt their company, isn't it? So what they're going to do, they're going to use their billions and they're going to give it to the Republicans they've even got Congress signing this pledge to say they're not even going to talk about it and do anything about it. That's going to benefit them. So they can continue using their billions. So what they're going to do then is give that money to the Republicans, right, who obviously are not going to fight for climate change. And at the same time, the Republicans are using that money for their own benefit. So it's them really that's steering the country back where they want it to be.
Right.
You see what I mean? It's the billionaires who are doing it. There's 400 and 500 around there who are doing this very same thing. And they're getting away with it. They're getting away with it because they're getting what they want.
So
I found it interesting.
Yeah, so can you just bear with me? Because I think Cedric's just talking. Sorry.
So can you? So they kind of like the Koch brothers are acting like the mafia, paying off the people right on the top.
And I mean, it's so strange. I mean, well, you talk about laws and they find ways to bend it, don't they? So, and that's what they're doing, and they're getting away. I mean, the fact that Congress, 156 people in Congress signed this pledge and said, listen, and they said to them, listen, you sign this pledge, we'll give you the money and you won't talk about climate change. And they signed it.
Well, money speaks, isn't it?
Right, exactly. And it gives that, and this is what, right, okay. I think it was Natalie, wasn't it? Natalie, do you want to ask a question? Sorry.
I was just saying, I noticed that David ran as a Libertarian for presidency in, I think it was 1980. Yeah, but now obviously he's pushing more with the Republican.
Yeah, exactly. So this is the very dark money underhandedness that's going on in the courts in the American scene today, and it's from the very wealthy who are steering the company. And a lot of people don't even know this. They think they're going to vote. They're thinking of a fair vote and not really understanding what's really going on in the country. So we know, because of what took place in Eden, we know it's also going to take place in our dispensation too. Okay, if anybody doesn't have any questions, we'll close now and end Sabbath school.
It's a summary or
Well, I've done the summary.
Okay.
Yeah, I've done the summary. Yeah, I've done the summary. So basically, what
very interesting.
Well, yes, go on. So go on, Emma. Sorry.
No, I was going to say it's very interesting the link you're making with climate change there, because I've wondered about the whole place that climate change plays in the whole thing, really. And it's very interesting that obviously the money is from fossil fuel industries, and that's why there is this push against it. Because you think if they want to preserve them.
Oh, we can't hear you now. Oh, Emma, we can't hear you now. Oh, you were nice and clear then. Emma? Right, we can't hear her. So what we'll do then, if nobody else has any more questions, or they'd like to elaborate on the presentation today, we'll close with a prayer. Okay, dear Holy God, we thank you so much for this Sabbath day, and we thank you for all that were here today and for the opportunity to present this presentation. It really helped me to understand what's going on in America, and I think it does when you start sifting out and looking at information for yourselves. And I thank you for it, Lord, because it's really given me an in-depth understanding of the underhandedness of what's going on in America and how this country is going to fall because it's going to be put in the hands of republicanism. So we thank you, Lord, for the information that we could extract, and we pray that everyone would have been blessed by the information today. And we thank you also that we can spend precious time with you. So we're going to end our Sabbath school now, and we thank you once again, Lord, for being with us. For we give you thanks and praise in and through our beloved Saviour, always to your great honour and glory. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Debbie.
Thank you.